All right, hello and welcome. It's the dramatic moment where the light shifts is always my favorite part of a day. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. Welcome to Cranbrook Art Museum. I have the distinct pleasure this evening of introducing Kat Goffnett, our Assistant Curator of Collections, who has done really just an incredible job putting together this Detroit collection over the last couple of years and this exhibition, How We Make the Planet Move. We're just really, really pleased to be able to celebrate the city of Detroit in this way here at Cranbrook, and I'm quite excited for this evening's conversation. So without further ado, I would love a huge round of applause for Kat.
Thank you, Lila. I'm gonna move my pencil. And thank you all again for joining us this evening for our first Detroit as Resource panel discussion. Before we begin, I'd like to provide a little bit of an introduction to Cranbrook's burgeoning Detroit collection, the exhibition, How We Make the Planet Move, as well as this discussion series. So in 2012, a new addition was made to the Cranbrook landscape, the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. With this new division, which is dedicated to revealing the Cranbrook story and the history of the campus, the Cranbrook Art Museum was able to turn its sights more firmly to the contemporary, in addition to continue to herald Cranbrook-affiliated artists. Just a few years later, in 2015, the museum received a generous gift from the collection of Dr. John H. Hilberry and his wife, Androniki Tsigarius. This gift included the objects on screen, as well as other works by Detroit artists working in the latter half of the 20th century, primarily associated with the Cass Corridor movement. Though the Art Museum has maintained a connection with the city of Detroit and the surrounding metro areas since its formation through exhibitions, programming, and some collecting, the latter half of the 2010s saw growth in solidifying its connection to the city through its collaboration with local artists and programming specifically conducted in the city, such as Maya Stovall's Liquor Store Theater, The Truth Is I Hear You, and performances for the blockbuster Nick Cave exhibition. From these projects and others, the museum began a more intentional practice of collecting work from exhibitions, such as Landlord Colors, where we get our beautiful Carole Harris, and Allie McGee, Banana Moonhorn. At the beginning of this decade, the Detroit collection became concretized in our collections management policy, and this specific subsection of the collection was created. We continue to show both Detroit artists and those with a Detroit and Cranbrook overlap, collecting from each exhibition. And getting to know the city and its artists better, both present and past. In 2021, we began our Fresh Paint series, which seeks to uplift the practice of an up-and-coming Detroit-based artist. This ongoing series works to keep momentum going on our Detroit-based research collection and also provides museological mentorship to emerging artists. How We Make the Planet Move is the first public debut of works from this collection, which has been amassed through generous gifts, museum purchases, and commissions. But the collection and this inaugural exhibition do not attempt to tell a monolithic tale of Detroit and its artists. No such story exists. Therefore, the exhibition has been divided into 4 main sections to allow for groupings of works to speak together on major themes and interests that have circulated throughout the city, expressed through an array of creative voices. However, many of the works in this exhibition defy confinement and can be read across narratives woven throughout the gallery. This exhibition will be the first of many in Cranbrook Art Museum's Detroit collection series as this special collection continues to grow to include more artists working in and around the city. The Detroit collection aims to hold up the city of Detroit, giving it the attention and reverie it has rightfully earned. The Detroit as Research Conversations came about as a means to feature artists in the exhibition, bringing them together to discuss their practices and connection to the city from an array of lenses. Over the years, artists who have called Detroit and its surrounding area home have called the city, taking inspiration from its broad collective culture, varied social milieux, spirited energy, and shifting materiality. Detroit as a resource, art of a post-riot city, pairs artists Carole Harris and Nancy Mitchnick. I was just going to make you one artist there, sorry. Both artists began their creative careers in the 1960s and 70s during what is cited as a particularly tumultuous period in Detroit's history, the time surrounding the riots of 1967. This time period, shaped by intense social, cultural, and political changes, resulted in what has been described as an undeniable energy that grew a culture of creatives from artists to musicians that inspired both Harris and Mitchnick. In 1980, the Detroit Institute of Arts put on the exhibition Kick Out the Jams, Detroit's Cass Corridor 1963 to 1977, which pulled together a group of artists living and working on Cass Avenue in downtown Detroit. Artists and artwork that are associated with this movement have been said to possess a raw energy aligned with the city in this revolutionary time. Arts writer Marcia Miro, in reviewing a similar exhibition at Cranbrook Art Museum in 1979, at Cranbrook, downtown Detroit, 21 artists, described the art of the city as expressionist and emotional in a review titled, quote, Detroit, the Scrappiness of Survivors, end quote. This narrative of hardscrabble artists working in an anti-formalist, post-industrial fashion, to cite Miro again, extended beyond those creating the work of the city to those working in more, quote, traditional media. Nancy Mitchnick is one such Cass Corridor artist who, while working in painting, still evoked the energy of the time and of the Cass's culture. Her earlier work, featured in the DAA's movement-defining exhibition, consisted mainly of portraits rendered in a loose, lively style, made of dense layers of paint that evoke more of a person's spirit than an exact, realistic rendering, demonstrating a powerful material sensibility in her approach to painting. Mitchnick studied painting at Wayne State University, earning her BFA in 1972. Here she became close with other artists involved in Cass Corridor, including Michael Lukes, who encouraged her to paint as she grew like a painter. During her time at Wayne, she worked closely with the artists who grew Willis Gallery, which opened its first location in the corridor in 1971 and hosted a solo show of Mitchnick's work in 1973. The same year, she moved to New York with her young daughter, drove a taxi, worked in an after-hours joint, assisted Bryce Martin, and taught at Bard College while pursuing her artistic career. Over the following decades, Mitchnick's innovative painting and teaching practices would take her around the country to teaching appointments at California Institute of the Arts and Harvard University, where she was eventually named Arnheim Lecturer on Studio Arts. Mitchnick has received, drumroll please, for Nancy Mitchnick, a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Pollock Krasner Foundation grant, a National Endowment for the Arts Award, and a 2015 Kresge Visual Arts Fellowship. Upon returning to Detroit in the 2000s, Mitchnick's paintings turned to the landscape of Detroit, including 13757, which is included in How We Make the Planet Move. These works depict disintegrating houses and small industrial buildings, revealing layers of time and emotion that these spaces have held within their walls, and now through the gaps in their structure. At the same time that the Cass Corridor was in full bloom, another space featuring a rambling group of Detroit creatives also came into existence, Gallery 7. This space was founded by Detroit legend Charles McGee. In 1969, he was asked by the Detroit Artist Market to curate an exhibition of Black art that he titled 7 Black Artists, featuring works by Lester Johnson, Henry Umbaji King, Robert Murray, James Lee, Allie McGee, Harold Neal, Robert J. Stull, and McGee himself. After the show garnered rave reviews, McGee went on to open Gallery 7 the following year, representing many of the artists in the exhibition, in addition to other nationally recognized names. The birth of this artist group also aligns with what has been described as a post-revolutionary energy. In a review of the recent exhibition at MoCAD, Kinship, The Legacy of Gallery 7, arts writer and artist Sarah Rose Sharp stated, quote, amid that social tumult, art and identity flourished in Detroit's majorly Black environs, where the social realism favored by many within the Black arts movement found a counterpoint in the work of artists exploring African influence and abstraction, including geometric motifs, jazz-inspired compositions, and West African masks and textiles, end quote. Carole Harris is one such artist working in abstraction and textiles who showed at Gallery 7. Her first solo show was in 1977. A lifelong Detroiter, Harris, a multi-talented creative, studied at Wayne State University, earning her BFA in 1966. Though she grew up creating with needle arts, it wasn't until Wayne that she fully started embracing textiles as her chosen medium. Harris enjoyed a successful career as an interior designer, founding Harris Design Group in 1976, where she served as president for 33 years. She retired in 2009 to focus her efforts on her artistic practice. Over her multi-decades-long careers, Harris has remained dedicated to the quilt form, though she has historically subverted traditional forms and techniques, expanding understandings of the medium through explorations in stitchery, overall shape, texture, and materiality. I have to skip ahead for one. One such unique technique employed by Harris is rusting, which can be seen in her work in a silent way, which is also on view in How We Make the Planet Move. Through rusting, Harris questions traditional notions of beauty, how we view it, and how it's achieved. This temporally rooted element also alludes to a quote from the artist that elucidates her perspective of her chosen material. Quote, "Fabric has a memory, it holds time," end quote. Harris has been a powerhouse advocate for artists in Detroit and beyond, and has been widely celebrated for her practice, earning awards in numerous exhibitions, including being named a finalist for 2020's Envision, the Michigan Arts Initiative, and a 2015 Kresge Visual Arts Fellowship. So thank you both to Carole Harris and Nancy Mitchnick for their participation in How We Make the Planet Move and today's talk. Let's welcome them up to the front. All right, so I wanted to start with a question from your early years, since you were both alumni of Wayne State University, as am I. Yay! So could you guys speak a bit about that experience and the atmosphere of the programs that you were in the 60s and 70s?
Who wants to go first?
Nancy, you want to go first?
Okay. It was fabulous. I mean, it really was wonderful. I painted in the corner of Old Main. There's still paint on the ceiling, I think. And I was so lucky to have Bob Wilbert as a teacher. He was a serious, you might know his work, I hope, serious representational painter, but he was very open to anything that had integrity and was real, and the student was struggling with honorably. He was an extremely kind, thoughtful, caring, inspirational teacher. And, it helped a lot, because I didn't think I could be a painter. It never occurred to me. I just took this class kind of for the hell of it. But look what happened.
All my classes were like that. Yeah, it was pretty wonderful. I got to go in there
Wow.
every day and just kind of play. And I was pretty much left to my own devices. They gave me a schedule at the beginning of the semester, and I went in there and I did whatever. I didn't really have a major until probably my senior year. Actually, I didn't even start at Wayne. I started at Highland Park JC and went there for a year and a half, I guess, before I transferred to Wayne in '63. But like I said, I was just taking classes, everything. I loved it all, and didn't know what the major was going to be until my senior year, and I decided, well, I need to do something so I can get a job. I can work. Who's going to hire a painter? I didn't know. So that's when I took a year probably of directed study in interior architecture. And so I really entered the art world through design and through crafts. I had no dreams or aspiration of becoming, quote, an artist as such. I always, was looking at function and practicality, I guess, or making. really, because I had been making since probably elementary school, which is where I learned to sew. I first learned to sew. And so fiber has been with me for all those years, ever since then. But again, it wasn't until after I left Wayne that I really latched on to fiber as an art practice, because I had been making clothes for myself, and I had all this fabric around. So I'm like, what can I do with this? And just started putting together, and it became a functional piece, a quilt. And then I did another, and another, and then finally it hit me. Oh, this is, can be a viable art form. So you can try and experiment with it and do some other stuff. So, but it all began kind of at Wayne with design. I had a wonderful art comp, I guess the course was called Design, Olga Constantine. And just playing with those paints and space planning, that's kind of still what I do, moving, working with color and space.
That's interesting to me because Olga Constantine really hated me. I was lucky to have Mr. Wilbert and John Egner.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that she loved me either, but, I was the kind of student, I didn't buddy around with the teachers. I was there for serious, like you're the teacher, I'm the student, So I don't care if you don't like me, just we're here, we got a purpose. So, yeah, that's how my experience was at Wayne.
I think she actually asked me to leave the class.
She asked you to leave?
She said she'd give me a grade if I'd leave. I was too sloppy. I mean, with such a deal, how could I resist?
One class or the whole class?
Just one class.
Oh, okay.
I didn't try Olga again. I stuck with Wilbert and Egner.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah. So Nancy, we're gonna dip back into the gallery worlds of Gallery 7 and Willis for a minute. So Nancy, you had your first solo show with the Willis Gallery in 1973. How did you come to be involved in the space and with cast corridor artists more broadly?
Well, we invented the space. We painted the space. We scraped the crappy, 20 years of layers of paint off the space before we could start. We worked really late into the night, and I have this really sad memory of these little children coming by like at 10:30, 11, saying they couldn't go home till their mom was done doing her bit. It was just sad. It was a kind of raunchy neighborhood at that time. But, we gave the kids stuff to drink, gave them a paintbrush, they had fun. And I think it was Greggy Murphy's idea, and we thought he was out of his mind. I mean, we were painting and drawing and making work, but we didn't think we could really be artists. I mean, how do you be an artist? It just seemed too big, because the only artists we knew of were really famous artists, Picasso and Matisse. But Mr. Wilbert was a very serious comp teacher, and Egner was this cool guy from Yale who was super hip. And Greggy Murphy was this very odd, Irish, serious drinker who really, I remember being at the Kresge Court and saying, I think we should introduce ourselves to Sam Wagstaff. And I said, are you kidding? He's a new curator. We're just kids. He said he might like to know that there's some young artists around. And I just thought he was out to lunch. He marched down the hall. Offices were different in those days. And Sam was interested in us. He was probably interested in the guys, but he liked everybody. And we weren't bad. We weren't great yet, but we were serious and strong, and the work was very intense, and it was, I don't know if it was original, but it was honest, and his support made a tremendous difference. And Greggy also got this idea of a gallery. And then Sam brought the collectors down. It was a miracle. What kind of artists are this lucky when they're that young? It was just incredible. I was up, I think, at Luke's farm and came back, and somebody had actually bought a painting. I knew they were for sale, but I didn't think anybody would buy one. And look what happened. I mean, they're all over the place.
Thank you. So Carole, you had your first solo show at Gallery 7 later on in its life in 1977. How did your relationship with that space begin, and how did your show come about?
Wow. Well, as you said, that space began in what year was it? I
It
forget.
would have been 70.
Yeah. 70. So it was around for a while, and I went to all the shows that they had there. But I was very good friends with Carole Neal. Actually, he was a friend and mentor since 61, something like that. I was very young when I met him. Still, I think I just started college. And, he just mentored me, took me to museums and to shows and whatever. And then some of the participants in the show, 7 Black artists or whatever it was called, were contemporaries, and they were also friends. In that period, I was still trying to figure out what I was doing, with this cloth, but so I always asked their opinion. There was Neil and McGee and both the McGees, Charles McGee and Allie McGee, who is my contemporary and very dear friend. So yeah, just going to all the shows that they had at Gallery 7, there was a lot of support from the African American community. That was probably the only place really that was showing the work of African American artists. So my mic went away. Anyway, actually, in I think 1972, my husband, who is a writer, Bill, had an exhibition at Gallery 7 with another friend. They did kind of a collaborative thing, a friend, Maceo Mitchell, who was an artist, and they produced a book and whatever. But, Gallery 7 sort of was the standard bearer for all African-American artists. So my dream was to one day have a show there, and going to all the exhibitions and just hanging around, talking to Charles and having him look at my work and whatever. Eventually I think I wore him down, and he said, okay, let's plan a show for you. And that's how it came about, just being there. And, I think obviously he saw something there. And so by that time was still figuring it out, but I had produced a body of work that I could produce a small show. I can't remember how many pieces were in that show, but it was sort of experimental, just going in lots of different directions. My work at that time.
Wonderful, thank you. So the Cass Corridor movement is named as such due to a bit of a more curatorial framework of the city more broadly. Gallery 7, however, just denotes a space, however incredibly crucial to Detroit art, where artists exhibited their work. Both Gallery 7 and Cass Corridor existed, or perhaps demonstrated a quote-unquote golden era, roughly in the same time frame of the late 60s through the 70s, and artists engaged in both spaces seem to share an affinity for reflecting the energy of the moment, which is inextricably tied to the politics of the time, of the 60s and the 67 riots specifically, and their lives in the city with very unique approaches to materialism, form, abstraction, and beyond. So how do you both view these milieus within the Detroit art world from the 1970s? We kind of got into it a little bit.
Now that's a long...
It's a long sentence. Why don't you tell me to cut it on Saturday?
I mean, what do you want me to respond to, being alive in the 70s?
Sure. In Detroit.
It was great. I was young. It was really fun. But, something that has been a tremendous aspect in my life is that I fell in love very young with a very handsome boy in high school named Kenny Mitchnick, and we made Marla. So I raised a child from a very early age and didn't finish high school, actually. And my Jewish New Yorker mother thought my life was over and I was doomed and it was just terrible. And my Polish carpenter dad said, she'll be fine. We know what she's made of. She'll be okay. And he was right, it worked out. And Marla's terrific. She's involved in film, being a smarty pants. So what was the question? 70s.
Sort of what was the energy of the time?
Oh, it was lively. It was rock and roll. It was, Rolling Stones. It was just hip and fun, and people were easygoing. I, of course, was raising Marla, so I didn't hang out at bars. When I got to go out to Cobb's Corner, for me, it was a big deal because I was home. I was cooking, I was baking, I was painting, but it was just so much fun. And there were dance parties and we were so lucky that Sam Wagstaff liked us. And I've already said that, I know, but I can't say it often enough. And also I had a work-study job at Wayne State, and I was studying ancient art with Dr. Peck, Bill Peck, at the museum. And I had this work-study job, and I asked him if I could work as a curatorial assistant or a errand girl, anything at the DIA, which made a tremendous difference in my life and was so lucky because the museum is so fabulous. And to just be there and be on the inside of it was a great, wonderful, I hate to say educational, but it was. And I learned a lot, and it was helpful in a lot of ways to just know how things worked in the larger world. So it wasn't just a kind of dream. Of course, it was ancient art, and half of what I had to do was hang out with the mummies while people unwrapped them and stuff like that. But it was interesting. I'm trying not to tell you the naughty parts. Do you want me to tell you?
Well, I'll go to Carole then.
Okay, good idea.
So, Carole, to shorten that paragraph of a question, what was sort of the energy of the time for you, and how did it drive your work?
Well, it was a little different than Nancy's experience. And we're talking about the 70s. I was working in the 70s, so I wasn't all playing.
What was your job?
I'm going to switch your mic out. We're having a little issue with the mics tonight. Thanks for your patience. We might need to just do this a few times. We'll see.
Okay. Thank you. Hello?
Hello.
Better? Oh, okay. Yeah, I think my experience was a little different from Nancy's, sort of. I wasn't raising any children, so I did have some fun time. I was out there playing sometime, but mostly I was working and trying to build a career as a designer. The fiber art thing was just something that I did, or I thought I was doing, for myself. After hours, after a hard day's work and whatever, Bill was doing the same thing. And he was heavily, actually, he was more involved with the artist's workshop. And that was part of the Chaos Corridor thing. He was I think he was one of the only, or the only African-American writer who was a part of that movement or that group. I think he's in Kick Out the Jams as well. But it was a fun time. We were also, and there were other, I don't want to say movement, but there was other art avenues that we were involved in. We were heavily involved with Concept East Theater. I don't know if any of you know about that, but that spawned a lot of people from theater in Detroit. Detroit had a very rich history, I think, especially in the African-American community, of supporting artists who were kind of excluded from mainstream. And there was, really a rich culture of music. And I know you all know about the jazz music. Of course, you know about Motown, but, there was just a huge history of, or culture of jazz in Detroit, as there still is today, fortunately. But there was also theater. And then, the shows at Gallery 7, we always look forward to, having those and going to those. So it was a fun time. But I think it was sort of a well-kept secret, It was not broadly known, I guess. It was basically word of mouth, I think, how, when these events were happening, you told somebody and they told somebody and they told somebody else. And that was how, it got broadcast. We didn't have social media. That was the social media back then. Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
I warned you on Saturday. I love the 70s, so I was going to ask you a lot about it.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
What'd you say?
I said I warned you on Saturday. I love the 70s, so I was going to ask you guys a lot about it. So Nancy, I have a question specifically for you. So what are your feelings to being linked to a movement that is so rooted in Detroit, given that your career undeniably continued to evolve as you moved across the country over decades and then only later returned to Detroit?
When people would ask me when I was teaching at Harvard, "Oh, Professor Mitchnick, where did you study?" I'd go, "In the D, Wayne State University," and it was really great. I always was proud of coming from a city like Detroit. My dad was a carpenter. I'm a working class kid, although my mother had a fancier family, but they both stuck. And, I was just thinking of a terrible story. My ex-husband's idea of child support, back in the days when it was completely illegal, was giving me a kilo of pot that I then had to sell. Now, is that nice? I would have liked just some money, but I mostly sold it to my college professors, so it all worked out. But, it wasn't easy. It wasn't exactly easy.
And they were all cast corridor artists.
Yeah.
All the college professors at Wayne. Yeah, that they
everybody smoked, but it was another story because it wasn't like now where you could go to the little store on the corner. But I didn't smoke. I was raising a little kid. It wasn't anything, I just wasn't into it. But what a business.
I didn't know this was going to be a comedy show.
So you both went against some so-called status quos for the time through working in more figural representational styles, in your case, Nancy, and abstraction, and a more craft-like medium, in your case, Carole. Mm-hmm. So what drew you each to eschew contemporary motivations in defining your practices? We'll go with Carole.
What motivated me to define my practices?
Yeah, there was sort of this move towards, I know I'm looking at Allie. Hi, Allie. And working on his show in the 60s and 70s, there's this a movement for Black artists to be representing their life, not through abstraction, but through this more of a social realism. And you went the way of textiles and abstraction, sort of against what some other artists of color were maybe feeling pressured to do.
Yeah, and even today, my work is not social, whatever they can call it. I do what I do, and you can call it whatever you want to call it.
Art.
But yeah, it's art. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I have always been a maker from a very early age, ever since I, learned how to pick up, use a needle and thread. And after learning how to actually sew, to make things, my mother taught me, probably I was about 8 or 9, something like that. She introduced me to embroidery and crochet and other textile arts. And actually today I sort of combine all of them in my art practice. But I don't know, I was just more interested in making. I didn't like paint because it was messy. I didn't like to get my hands dirty. Yeah, I wasn't necessarily a girly girl, wasn't all frilly, but I just, I like my nails nice, okay?
I never got to have nice nails.
Yeah, so I was not interested in painting in that way. And also, I at the time, like you said, a lot of the artists were into social realism or making social commentary. I didn't want to bring that to my work. I was angry, yeah. like everybody else, because there was a lot to be angry about, as it is today. But my practice was something that I found joyful, and I wanted to express that joy in the work. So my work was really more about Black joy, showing, as was, I think, a lot of the artists of the Gallery 7. I don't know if you've seen any of Charles McGee's early works. They were about family and about raising his children and, those sorts of things. So, I'm not sure if I answered your question. I followed my own path. I wasn't doing what was popular or what anybody else was doing. So, and that's always been the way I've worked.
You absolutely did. And art is a space for these sort of social cries, but it also is a space where people can find reprieve too, and joy. So you're just going in that route. That's effective in kind of both of these ways. Yeah. So Nancy, why figuration? I know you said you thought you would be an abstract painter.
Oh, I wanted to be an abstract painter. I really did. It was hipper, cooler, more intelligent, but I didn't have a reason to work abstractly. I couldn't, they weren't good. I mean, I could tell they were idiotic. And my response to something I could actually see, I mean, I'm not simple-minded exactly, but.
Not exactly.
But. And I never imagined that I would like to paint portraits, but somehow making the scale larger made them a little more abstract, which made it more interesting to me. Like Bob Woodward had been a teacher of mine, and he was such a marvelous painter, and I couldn't work like that. But I was extremely lucky that he was very helpful and trusted and approved of and encouraged me and felt that I had integrity, because what if he hadn't? I'd be playing the clarinet in some weird band now. But he was a wonderful teacher, and I just worked in that corner of Old Main, and the ceilings were so high and the light was so beautiful. It was also so nice to have a place to work like that. I like pottery too. I made a lot of ceramics with Bill Pitney in the pottery shop overlooking the incredible gardens. Wayne State was a very good school for me. And the thing about paint is it's very expensive. And the good colors, the colors that have strong tintoral strength, are particularly expensive. Like a good tube of cerulean blue can be $50. But things were less expensive in those days. And I remember just hating Shiva. I mean, even then I was fussy about the tintoral strength of the paint. And I can't say that I'm a fine craftsman. I mean, I know artists who I would call fine craftsmen, but I know a lot about the materials, and I would teach about the materials. And I've even made paint just to see and it was interesting to do. I have a Muller and a gritty glass palette. But what a pain in the ass, I mean, really, to make the paint. It was more fun to use it. But I know a lot about the materials, and I've taught materials classes and stuff. I've been very lucky in my teaching jobs anyway.
Wonderful.
Did I answer your question?
Absolutely.
Oh, good.
Tried abstraction, wasn't working. I got you. So both of your works share an affinity for free expression and improvisation to various degrees. Carole, you have even said tonight you draw inspiration from jazz. And Nancy, you've been known to rework paintings, revisiting them over and over again. So how do you both define when a work is finished?
That's a question I get asked a lot. And probably every time the answer is different because each work is different. So, that each work tells me when it's done. But I think it's probably done when I let it leave the studio. Otherwise it's game to be worked on, over and over and over again. I have had things in the studio for years that have just kind of sat there And, and one day it says, look at me, make me work. And so that's how it begins. It just, I think it's an accumulation of years worth of experience that draws you back to, you look at it in a different way, than you did when you started 10 years or 5 years, however long ago it was. But and sometimes, I'll start on a piece and it will go really quickly and, it's done and I've fallen in love with it and I know it's done. But then there are others that have to be worked over and over, and then they have to marinate. Sometimes you just have to let them sit. You can't force it to be ready. You just have to let it sit. And that's why I like working on multiple things at a time. When I get tired or stuck working on one piece, then I go do something else, And often it will, I will get the solution to the first problem by working on the second one. So, that's kind of the way I work. And again, it probably is never really finished until I let it leave.
Wonderful.
It's odd. My process is similar, though it's so different. But when I can't put another mark on the painting, when there's just no place to make another move, then I'm done. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I wreck them. It just happened. But not lately. I mean, the years sort of teach you a few things. I don't know. I don't know why I still love doing it so much. Turpentine. I mean, it's not a perfume. And oil paint. I have this special, what's the name of the hand cleaner? Like guys who mix cement use it to get the paint off my hands. I mean, it's messy. But I'm so grateful that I can manage to make paintings. It's interesting and it changes. And I've slowed down a bit. I'm old, but I'm still surprised sometimes.
So I want to go to a question that we kind of workshopped a little bit together. Thinking specifically, Nancy, about your work on Detroit spaces and your constructed quilts, Carole. There's an element of layering in both of your work that feels intentional and exploratory. Can you both speak to how layering is used in your practice, practically, materially, and conceptually?
Yikes.
You can pick one. It can be a multiple choice, A, B, C, D, all of the above.
How can you not make layers if you're painting? Because the first hit isn't, sometimes if the first hit is fabulous, the painting's going to be pretty good. If the first hit is really wobbly, then there's a lot to do. And sometimes that painting gets a little overworked. It starts from the very beginning. And I don't know why. Something I feel like working on. I still look at things when I paint. I paint portraits, I paint still lifes. I'm really old-fashioned. I have to laugh at myself. But what was the question again? I mean, there's just a point when, are you asking about when it's finished?
No, about what role layering plays in your work.
Every role. I mean, it's because if you start it off, it's kind of skimpy. You can still see the canvas through the paint. Sometimes there's little places in works of mine where you can see canvas a little bit. But I'm interested, it's interesting to make a painting. And even though I've been doing this for so long, I don't always know what I'm doing, which is kind of refreshing, if not stupid. And it's just, and then you mix a palette and the colors are wrong, and then you try to get, I'm interested in color. Then I guess I use the word inevitable. If it isn't inevitable by the time I think it's finished, I'm not finished. It just needs to be what it is, and it can't be anything else. And it takes a long time, and sometimes I really mess up. But the process, I start out listening to rock and roll, then I kind of move to jazz. By the time I'm finishing, it's classical music. What can I tell you? That might explain it.
Love that. Carole, how about you?
Yeah, well, first of all, a quilt is a layer. I mean, it's composed of 3 layers. That's technically, I guess the definition of a quilt. But I was struck, first of all, in terms of the layers, by how much similarity there is in my work today, the work that I'm doing today, and what Nancy is doing. And the fact that we're both influenced by time and aging buildings, really. In my work as an interior designer, I was often on construction sites, and I'm always looking at buildings. I don't know why, but I just find them interesting. And most buildings seem to be built kind of on a grid. They're up and down, crossways. Those floors are built on blocks, pretty much the same way a quilt is. But as I guess the current work started sort of as a reaction or defense of the city. I started doing this particular phase of work several years ago when Detroit was getting so much attention about ruin porn. And, I didn't like that. I got, pretty upset about people looking at my city and saying, these really not so nice things about Detroit and about the buildings. And I don't know, I just started looking at it as, I saw beauty in a lot of the deterioration. So kind of the things that I do now are like a microcosm. I've blown up, I'll take like a little section and make a composition from just that little section that I see. And I wondered, looking at these buildings conceptually, I guess I saw them as a metaphor for life. You don't really know about a person or a thing, I guess, until you start to peel away the layers. And what you see on the surface only tells you part of the story. So that's how, I started thinking about these buildings as I saw them. Why, as you tear away the facade, buildings that are on in various stages of deconstruction. Why was this wall over here on this side, purple, and why was this side right next to it flowered? Well, it was about the life of that building, and it told a story about the inhabitants of the building and, what happened in that building. So, that kind of fascinated me, and I started to take that to a different level. How can I interpret that, in cloth? And then I became aware of or introduced to Japanese boro, which is a type of quilt making that uses rags. Basically, rag is the word. A boro is the Japanese word for rag. And the construction reminded me an awful lot of these buildings in these various stages. So I've been making work that is sort of a combination of those things and those layers, actually. And then, I began adding other layers, layers of embroidery, just things from my life, Stitchery, I use like drawing. So
I think you have more fun than I do.
What did you say?
I think you have more fun than I do. Turpentine and paint is so murky.
But I love what you're saying, and then something that you've I actually saw on the Wasserman website about the paintings of the houses being this sort of reflection on and sort of love letter to these spaces, which I think is really, really beautiful, that even though there's abstraction going on and representation, there is still this connecting thread that brings your two bodies of work together, even though there may, on the surface, not appear to be as much connection as there really is, maybe even almost sort of spiritually, right?
Soulful girls, that's what we are.
I'm getting the move from Lila, so I think with that, we're going to go to some questions from the audience, the very beautiful audience we've got before us.
Well, yeah, I'll bring you a microphone if you have a question, and if not, I'll get started with the questions myself. Okay, I'm on my way. Quickly, I'd like to ask a little bit about scale. I'm really interested in the sort of scoping of scale in both of your work. Thoughts?
Was that a question?
Yeah, like what are you, I mean, there's sort of like, for me in this work that is up here by Carole, there's this sort of sense of I get this sort of like planetary scale, like looking back down at the earth, and also thinking about like the literal scale of the works, like the canvases, the size of them are really wonderful and striking. You don't often see in your work, Nancy, this type of subject matter at scale. And so I'm always sort of interested in how artists feel about the sort of the scale of their work, and then also the sort of scoping of details.
Well, I really care about the scale, and I think about it and kind of plan it out and have stretchers made in relationship to what I think I want to work on. Sometimes I get it wrong, but ask Allison. But it's something that is, there are painters who just slap it on any old size, and you can tell that the size wasn't accounted for, that just the picture and the rendering or some fancy little bit. And I don't think those are the best paintings. And it's not just that I love Mondrian, but good figurative painters, my teacher, Robert Wilbert, he really thought about scale. I was very lucky to have him as a teacher. And I always worked out, sometimes it's really a nuisance because you get it wrong. You think you've got an idea, but the image is really too big for the size of the stretcher, or vice versa. And then what are you going to do? Make a crappy painting or get another stretcher? Ask Allison. I get another stretcher. I'm lucky. But it wasn't always, but it just seems there aren't that many. I work kind of simply. I'm not a super renderer. I don't fuss with the texture of skin and the glint on an eyeball. The work is representational, but painted somewhat abstractly. And I'm interested in that. So the scale is very, very important to me. If I was more like my teacher, Bob Wilbert, and really able or wanted to paint beautifully, perfectly, accurately representational so I could get glowy skin or paint wrinkles better or something, I don't know. I might not care so much, but I need the scale and the quality of the shapes of the images to work together. I think deep in my heart, I still long to be an abstract painter, but since I don't manage to do that, the best I can do is abstractly organize the structure. And I think that's one of the reasons they're solid, I hope.
Okay, can you give me the question again?
Yeah, I'm going to yell. Just thinking about the scale of your work, there are these tiny individual pieces that when they come together, to me, they really feel like maps. And the sort of, there's almost like, in the case of this thumbnail, like a streetscape. And it feels like they're very big and very small at the same time. And I think that's really, really fascinating. So just thinking about that, I'd love to hear about your thoughts on the scale of the work and how it sort of scopes for you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to say about that, but I can start very tiny and, just start. I often start a piece by just picking up a couple of pieces of cloth on my work table and, just putting them together. And sometimes those 2 or 3 pieces alone constitute a completed composition. And, you could take that and actually blow it up and make the same thing larger. But I don't know, I sometimes like filling up the space, and I forget that sometimes simple is better. Just, keep it small if it's small. Or you can do the same thing starting out with a large piece of fabric or a couple of large pieces of fabric. That doesn't always work for me. I'm trying to get, larger sometimes, but I don't know. Yeah, scale is a factor. It's important, but I think it just depends on the individual pieces and how you're working on any given work at any given time. Some things just want to be small.
Some people want to be small.
Exactly.
All right, just one brief comment. When you were talking about the differences between their works, when I look at these, they come across as extremely similar to me. They are sort of abstract versions of pretty much the same idea.
I'm sorry, they're abstract versions of, I'm losing you.
Of sort of the same idea. You can, you know, if you don't think of one as a painting and one as a quilted object,
Right.
to me, they're very, very similar. So when, you know, I don't think there's that much difference between you gals.
Yeah. They're
But-
very similar to me as well. I
Yeah.
don't know if Nancy got that. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I just wanted to say was, as you're giving your talks, there were so many touch points for me, like being at Highland Park Community College and being at Wayne and being in pottery and having children. And I think there are probably a number of us of sort of your age, our age here, that maybe had similar experiences during that time. 6 Mile and Woodward during the, 67 riots and all of that went together. So personally, I just really, really have appreciated tonight and your comments and that. And it's really heartfelt for me. It's an era that we all were through. We took the good and the bad.
And we kept dancing.
And we kept
kept it
working, and I think we actually, through our work, not necessarily artwork, community organizing, everything we did, we helped pull it through, right? We helped make it better than certainly it was in 1967, right? So I just wanted to say that I really appreciate you and this experience and putting this conversation on. It's a big deal. We have to keep talking, right? We have to keep remembering how it was, what it was, and how we move forward together. Mm-hmm. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both again.
I don't know, I feel like that feels like an applause moment, does it not?
Nancy, I'm surprised that you don't consider yourself an abstract painter. Could you say
I love you. Who's talking?
right here?
Oh, hi.
Hi. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, that's awfully kind, but if there's an eyes and a nose and a mouth, how abstract is that? Or a building? Or, it's representative. It's nice of you to say that. I feel like I think abstractly, but I make images that are very observable and identifiable. And I can't seem to stop for some reason.
But you do something to them that brings abstraction to the front, I think. You're painting this knowable, seeable reality, but you bring some of the unknown.
Well, there are a lot of painters who make really bad paintings because they don't think about the structure. They're involved in, I was a teacher for a very, very long time. And I think I was a very good teacher, but boy, it was a struggle. Some kids just wanted it to look right. They didn't care where it was on the canvas. They really just didn't even want to think about it. They just wanted it to look like a thumb or a nose or whatever it was. It's a certain mindset. I think maybe I was lucky that my dad was a carpenter. Who knows? He built structures. My mother was a terrific baker, though. So I've already said what my mother said when I showed her my first painting, didn't I? Oh, she said, if you fix the bottom and change the top, it would be okay. She was not always that encouraging.
Do we have another question, Lila? Or I couldn't tell.
Was your mother nice about your work?
Pardon me?
Was your mom nice about your work?
She was.
Oh,
She
you were
was,
lucky.
yeah. She loved my work. She was always there. That was a good thing, because I know a lot of people whose families did not encourage artistic pursuits. Mine were like, whatever.
Yeah, you were
It's
lucky. My
beautiful.
dad was nicer about it than my mother. He was a carpenter. And I remember when I painted his portrait, he said, "You're having all the fun. I want to get back to my workshop." He built a lot of model airplanes, too.
Quick shout out to CG, my mom. She's also wonderful. And to the question.
Hello. Shout out to moms.
Yeah.
So I think my question is, I'm trying to find the way to word it. It's been really lovely hearing you talk about the space you've been making art in here in Detroit. And it also strikes me how different your approaches are in, the outcome and in the medium. Something that you've both talked about, though, is seeing art as things that are original or honest and things that have integrity. And I guess I was wondering from the two of you, in your own words, how you would define artistic integrity.
That's not easy.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Artistic integrity.
He mentioned that you guys had both discussed the sort of element of honesty in creating your work. And he was wondering about how you personally define the sort of concept of artistic integrity, I think, if I'm paraphrasing you correctly.
Have you taught a lot?
Pardon me?
Have you taught a lot?
I have not taught ever.
Lucky you. Well, I've taught a lot. And it's interesting, there are students who will work really hard to get something that is structured strongly and inevitably, as well as represent something if they're involved in representation. And then those who just don't care. If it looks like a face, who cares where it is in the space? You know what I mean? So from my point of view, integrity has to do with both, no matter how, and Bob Wilbert was such a wonderful teacher. Think about his compositions. No matter how representational it is, if the composition is just sloppy or not, if there's no structure to it, or if you've just got this, well, I can like pictures of waves, but I don't even know how to answer that question, I guess. It's just there has to be a relationship between the image and the structure. And the relationship, it can be loose, it can be really connected, but it has to be important in some way. And I think when you're working, when it's visual, it's not exactly in words. I'm a wordy person, but I don't even know how to describe what I do when I'm working. It's an experience, it's a sensation, it's desire, it's annoyance, it's aggravation, it's luck some of the time. And if you can stop at the right time, that's really lucky. It's a mystery. And I think if it wasn't, why would it be so interesting to do? If I knew everything I needed to know to do what I do, I would just repeat myself all the time. I guess I do a little. How can you not? But I don't know. And also, I think artists, no matter what your practice is, have to enjoy all kinds of art forms. I like to read a lot. And I like to look at things. And I like nature. And I like cooking. And, I'm sure you do too.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think you have to be curious.
Yeah.
Really curious. And serious about yourself. You have to be willing to give yourself wholly to whatever it is you're doing as an artist. To exploring it to the nth degree. And
Sometimes it's disappointing.
It will lead.
No, I think
Sometimes you get lucky.
Yeah. No, I think there's something to what you're both saying about seriousness and curiosity in response to your question, especially. You've got to take what you're doing seriously and treat it as the job that it is, right? And that curiosity about who you are, what you're doing, what you're trying to say, I think can lead to that honesty that they're both speaking about in their practices, right? Finding that voice that is yours. You got to be serious about it, and you have to be curious.
And you have to keep searching, too. I know painters who just paint the same thing over and over again. They sell them, they're good, they're happy. But I like to try other things out, and lots of times they fail. Allison doesn't see those as often. But that seems okay, because if you're learning something, how can you be successful all the time? You want to try things out. I don't know. I feel very glad that I have. My gift is small, but I work hard, and I'm grateful.
Yeah, it is hard work, and I unfortunately I see too many wannabe or would-be artists who are not willing to put in that work. I think it was Picasso or somebody like that who said, after you've done 1,000 drawings, then maybe you get one. And it really takes that. You have to keep doing it and keep doing it. And know that it's going to come one day. If not, you can give it up and become a carpenter or something else, anything else.
I go through old drawing books and toss stuff away. I mean, some of it's terrible.
We'll take one last
The
question here.
archivist in me is dying, Nancy.
Pardon?
The
Hi.
archivist in me is dying.
I'm actually just wondering, with all of the transitions that Detroit has been through in all the years that you've been involved in art, where have you found your inspiration in each of those transitions? Or has it pretty much been the same? I know transitions can occur emotionally, they can occur physically, and how have you managed to keep your inspiration up with all the challenging things that have happened over the years?
That's a
So
hard
that goes
question.
back to the question of integrity. I mean, how do you, what was the question? How do you find inspiration? Inspiration, I think, comes from within. You don't look to external issues for inspiration, or at least I don't. Anyway.
I started painting about 25 years ago. It's not my profession, but internally, it just came from inside of me. And I stand in front of a canvas and I just put on what I feel and what I see. If there's things going on in the news that are upsetting to me, sometimes I'm able to get past that. Sometimes I attack the canvas because of that. And that's what I'm wondering about. As the artist that you have become, do you have that same soulful expression? I mean, I know it comes from the soul, but do external things affect you in that way? And then do you take it out on your canvas? Or, I mean, I love to paint.
If I took out my irritation at the political situation,
Yeah, really.
those paintings would really suck.
Yes.
Will there even be canvas left? I don't know.
Leave that one alone.
Thank you to Carole Harris, to Nancy Mitchnick, and thank you to Kat Goffnett for her work on How the Planet Moves. The galleries are open for about 10 more minutes if you'd like to sneak back up and see the show. Thank you again for joining us for this conversation. We're so pleased to be with you tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.